Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Future Cities Symposium. I'm your host, Dean Landy, partner at ClarkeHopkinsClarke Architects here in Melbourne, and I lead our urban design and major mixed-use teams. So on behalf of ClarkeHopkinsClarke and my colleague and co-host today, Hayley Hooper, I'd just like to say thanks for joining us today. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from Williamstown, the land of the Yalukit William I peoples of the Hobsons Bay area and part of the Boonwurrung language group for the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and I recognise their custodianship over time and their continuing connection to lands, water and communities. I also extend that respect to traditional owners of the land that each of you are on today, wherever you may be in lockdown, and also to the First Nations people, including those joining us today. In particular, I want to acknowledge one of our speakers, Wurundjeri William artist and traditional custodian, Mandy Nicholson. We're honoured to have you here today, Mandy. Now, obviously, it's disappointing that we're not all able to welcome you in person at our new home at Melbourne Connect, the Innovation Precinct. It would have been brilliant to all be there in person, but it is very exciting to have been able to adapt, as we all have, and we now have over 350 joining us this morning. We've condensed this format to be better adaptable to an online version for the event, and as we initially conceived it. And it's going to be around inspiring conversations with change makers about creating more regenerative cities. These are the kind of ecologically, socially and emotionally healing places that we all want to live and work in, and communities that in reality we want to be part of. And they're places we need to really create pretty quickly. If you've been following the news, you will have seen what's been addressed in the climate emergency and the speed and scale that this is taking place. And last week's IPCC report highlighted to all of us that yet again just how quickly and decisively we need to make significant change in this space. The aim of Melbourne Connect is to bring leaders together from across disciplines, industries, and fields of research to collaborate on solutions to our biggest shared challenges. So we as a group decided that the most useful contribution we could make at this point to this launch event of Innovation Week was to bring together a mix of people leading the way through different approaches, people that inspire us and challenge us as professionals to really be able to make an impact and make a difference. So to get started, I'll hand it over to Hayley, my co-host, to give you a bit of an overview of the speakers and the format today.
Good morning, everybody. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, o te kaupapa nui o te rā, tihei mauri ora. So my name is Hayley Hooper. I'm a Māori urban designer, so obviously from New Zealand, and I work with ClarkeHopkinsClarke. So like Dean, I'm incredibly grateful to our inspiring speakers today for sharing their time, passion, and experiences and insights with us. Two of the speakers today we've been lucky enough to work with through our shared mission to create high quality, walkable, vibrant communities. One of those is James Mant, a key driver of Melbourne's 20-minute neighbourhood movement. Another one is Ludo Campbell-Reid, an urban strategist who championed excellence in urban design, city-scale livability, and has delivered many lasting initiatives in Auckland, before that in London. And now we're very fortunate enough to have Ludo working on this side of the ditch for the city of Wyndham here in Melbourne. We've also reached out to 3 people that we haven't worked with before, whose work we admire and we think is very central to this conversation as leading change makers in urbanism and regenerative practice. So we also have Dominique Hez, who is a leading educator internationally on regenerative design, who has co-wrote Designing for Hope, Pathways to Regenerative Sustainability with Krishna Duplessis. And we also have Mandy Nicholson, as you've heard from Dean, is a traditional owner and also an artist, ranger and PhD in the built environment, amongst many other things. She embodies the care of country at the heart of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and regenerative practices that have sustained it and this place and country for millennia. Hosting the panel discussion, we have Misha Ketchell, who is the editor of The Conversation, which is a very successful international media organisation that started here in Melbourne, with a powerfully simple idea. The Conversation teams academics with journalists to create collaborative news with depth of information provided by experts and then publishes that under Creative Commons so that it is widely shared and credited. Misha has a knack for asking interesting questions to tease out key themes of big topics, which makes him the perfect host for our panel discussion and audience Q&A. So keep those questions in your mind. The format for today is this. We'll start with presentations of 10 to 15 minutes from our speakers, James, Mandy, Dominique, and Ludo. And then at the end, Mish will moderate a panel discussion of about 20 minutes, partially driven by questions that come from you, the audience. So please do send through your questions as you're listening via the Q&A button that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. And Mish will weave in as many of those questions as possible as he prompts our speakers to discuss the key themes that emerged today throughout this symposium. Our speakers have done an incredible job condensing their presentations to their essence so that we can have time for thought-provoking and spontaneous discussion at the end. We do know it's a little bit hard to maintain focus on these Zoom forums, but we know how interesting this is going to be, so stay tuned. We know you'll walk away with useful questions, ideas and actions that you can take out into your projects and share into your sphere of influence. Together, this gets us all closer to the kind of regenerative future that we want and need. So I'll hand it back over to Dean to get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Hayley. So now on to our first speaker, James Mant. Many will know James. James is the 20-minute neighbourhoods lead at the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. He's received a commendation from the Planning Institute of Australia for his work on developing Plan Melbourne 2017 to 2050. And he has worked in the UK, Netherlands and Ireland. He's presenting today on the influence of place on regenerative neighbourhoods, and it's something I know from our perspective at CHC is just really something relevant that we're applying to a lot of our town centre designs and major urban renewal. So I'm excited to hear from you, James, so over to you.
Great, thanks Dean. First of all, I will share my screen. Okay. Is that shared okay? Oh, good. Yes, I can see it. Right. Okay. So today I've condensed my presentation, so I'm going to run through it really quickly. But I won't really talk too much about what 20-minute neighbourhoods means. But I really want to focus on our experience in implementation and kind of the challenges that we've been facing, what we've learned, and what we're doing next. So. I will start off though just by saying that the policy itself, getting that right was actually quite important. So in terms of implementation, if you don't know what it means, then you can't really implement it. So we spent a lot of time during the refresh of Plan Melbourne coming up with a definition which is in Plan Melbourne, so it's policy. There at the top of the screen, and hallmarks, which were quite, we spent a lot of time across government in developing those. So really what we're talking about is this concept of living locally, giving people the ability to meet most of their needs within a 20-minute return walk from home. So that's 10 minutes there and 10 minutes back, or 800 metres roughly, with access to cycling and public transport. And the hallmarks talk about safe, accessible, connected, active transport areas, high quality public realm, open space. They provide services and destinations for local living, support access to transport connecting to those other places. Importantly, population and housing density that really enable those services and thriving local economies. So getting that right and having that as the basis of what we do going forward is really important. I guess from our work, and I apologise, I know loads of people have seen these kind of photos, but it does kind of demonstrate that we have a real challenge ahead of us, and we actually really need to do better. And I'm really interested in why is this happening, and what can we do about it? And I just jotted down some of the things that we found in terms of challenges, and I won't go into challenges too much, but I think there's really not a strong focus on design, or enough of a strong focus on design, and how that relates to density, and how density is an enabler of walkability. So those things are all linked, and they don't have enough focus. We've had a long history now of car-based design and car parking, driving things, and changing that is like turning an oil tanker or something. It's quite difficult. So that's another challenge. Then we do have different types of policy and conflicting regulation around, which can make it quite difficult to achieve what we're doing. We've got fragmented decisions, differing priorities. You have differing priorities in government, for example, which might make things difficult. Then we've got the challenge of community views. What do they feel about development? We live in quite a contentious sort of planning system. How do we turn that around, talk about design, educate as well? plus we've found that talking to many people, there's really not a lot of incentive for innovation or best practice. So how do we address that? It really is an implementation challenge. So I won't run through these, but in too much detail. But what are we talking about? We're talking about third places in terms of 20-minute neighbourhood, dense, compact, connected, affordable housing, attention to detail and quality in terms of the place experience, connections to public transport. And there's many benefits, which I won't go through, but our report we released, I'm sure the presentation will be shared as well, but we released a report which listed, we wanted to bring together all the research which shows you why this is such a great thing to do in terms of all those benefits. But what we really wanted to do primarily after Plan Melbourne was released and we got the policy right was go, okay, well, how do we implement this and who do we work with to do that? So we went out to councils and asked who would be interested in partnering with us, the state government, to deliver it on the ground or look at how we might deliver it on the ground. And we did a 2-year pilot program with Brimbank, Moonee Valley and Maroondah councils, where we tried to really talk about the place, focus on the place, the neighbourhood. They were in neighbourhood centres, talk about all of the issues that related to that place. And we found that actually all of the issues really relate back to 20-minute neighbourhoods and delivering them. And so that was a 2-year program, and I can't go into too much detail because I don't have time, but I will say we learned a lot from that. And we released this report in 2019, which actually we tried to sort of summarize what are the key things that we need to do to better implement 20-minute neighbourhoods. And firstly, I guess from going back to basics was let's get the planning system right. You know, the VPPs, the Victoria planning provisions, let's get them right and to enable us to implement it. Let's provide the guidance, the tools and everything we can to assist councils in delivering it. We need to monitor how we're going. You know, we don't do that very well at the moment. How do we know whether we're going in the right direction or not? We need to better enable best practice. We need to look at how we can better fund this and sort of work with those other parts of council and within government that are delivering things that complement that, such as the movement and place framework at transport. We really have to have a design focus. We want to promote and educate and talk about place and it's boring, but coordination is really important. You have to have, and 20-minute neighbours, I guess, provides a coordinating kind of vision which people can understand and get behind, which we found really worked well during the pilot. Not to go into too much detail, but this has been a growing movement, obviously since COVID. I'll come on to that, but there's a lot of work that's happening all around the world. We've had discussions with Paris and other cities, as well as Scotland. Scotland are really powering ahead with 20-minute neighbourhoods. They've really taken out a lot of our work. We've been working with the Scottish government and they've really put some serious money behind it. I think £250 million in regeneration and 500 million for active transport. So other places are really taking this on board now. But COVID is worth obviously throwing in because we're all, unfortunately, at the moment stuck in our little experiment of 20-minute neighbourhoods being within our 5 kilometres. And it really has focused everyone's attention on their local area and what you have or you don't have nearby. So it's really given us a bit of a boost in terms of localism and I think it's really gone back to some of those timeless principles around place and places for people and, you know, looking after your neighbours and knowing your local shopkeeper and that kind of thing. But we've really seen that decentralisation happen because of it, and some interesting, some of which we funded there, those photos, public realm works. So how do we build on this opportunity, I suppose, to deliver? It's a disruptor that's helping us with delivery. And what we did in the pilots was we took the opportunity and we looked for funding across government to deliver temporary activations within those councils, and we managed to secure money, and we worked with the councils to look at, you know, public realm works responding to the community, but also it actually was happening around the time of COVID starting. So we we looked at, distancing and outdoor dining as well. And here was the result: Sunshine West. We did the street art. That was a local school kid who designed that. Public pop-up parks. We're seeing this all across Melbourne, so, and it's really great to see that you are using. That's actually in the car park. That park there. So really, I guess to conclude mostly what I've been saying into sort of main takeaways, I guess, is really place-based planning was at the heart of what we were doing, and I think it really was all about the place. It wasn't about individual issues. It was about everything that related to that place. So how do we fit the system to enable us to do place-based planning, and how do we have tools that can bring the community in early and discuss those things up front? How do we better educate and empower? We're looking at visualizations. We're also working with the Geography Teachers Association of Victoria to work with Year 7. So now Year 7 kids can study 20-minute neighbourhoods as part of their geography course. How do we better embed design and enabling that into the work that we do, and championing best practice? And we have some opportunities coming up with Plan Melbourne. Plan Melbourne is due for the implementation plan is due for a review next year. So we're looking at, well, what can we strengthen there, and what are the actions we can take as state government? Perhaps better coordination, perhaps better investment. And finally, I just wanted to throw this one in because we hear a lot about smart cities and technology and solutions, and I suppose I wanted to just throw it in to say, I don't think that this is going to be a panacea for solving these city issues that we have, and I guess there's a risk that that we make similar mistakes to when we plan for cars, and the issue of planning for proximity, being close to things, could be challenged with this autonomous vehicle. It brings opportunities, but I think we have to be really careful about how we use technology to support timeless, walkable urbanism rather than challenge it, I suppose. So that was sort of the last point I wanted to finish. I think hopefully that was around 10 minutes, and my details are there. So I'll happy to take questions at the end. Thank you, Dean.
Thanks a lot, James. That was excellent.
Sorry,
so many ideas, I guess, in such a short space of time that James has just conveyed to us there around the importance of 20-minute neighbourhoods, but also just some very big concepts, I think, that were condensed into a short format in a really intense and excellent way. I think some of the things that I took away from it is really this call to action, and you've used a number of words around implementation, enabling, delivering, and championing. So I think coming from a policy point of view, but being able to provide these kind of practical, very proactive, action-based, policy-led pilots and programs that can enable us to create better urban environments is an excellent take home for us all. And also, I guess James quite nicely led into the things around human-centered design. Maybe we can start to talk about country-centered design, localism, and these place-based initiatives, which I think leads into our next speaker, who is Mandy Nicholson. Mandy is a Wurundjeri William artist and traditional custodian of Melbourne and its surrounds. She is a ranger with the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation and a Woiwurrung language specialist in the PhD in the built environment. She's been an oral history worker with the Koori Heritage Trust, helping people reconnect with family. And she has worked as an archaeologist conducting post-bushfire assessments for the Wurundjeri Tribe Land Compensation Cultural Heritage Council. She's also the artist behind the award-winning art installation at the Burwood Brickworks, which is Melbourne's best-known example of regenerative commercial design. And in April, that was awarded the Living Building Challenge Petals certification, the most advanced measure of sustainability in the built environment internationally. This requires developments to have a net positive impact and operate as cleanly, beautifully, and efficiently as nature's architecture. So I'll hand it over to Mandy now for her presentation on bringing Indigenous thinking to future-focused placemaking, something that's very close to my heart also. So over to you, Mandy. Thank you.
Ladu Nyanwa. Naranik Mandy, Wurundjeri Willamik, Wurundjeri Balakut, Mundanai, Murupkalada Birarang, Mundanai Kirapik, Mundanai Lalalba Gugung Nugulik, Ba Jaburang, Ba Nurailamurang, Ba German. So my name's Mandy Nicholson. I'm a Wurundjeri woman. I also have connections to the Dja Dja Wurrung and Nurayilum Wurrung language groups of Victoria, and also German on my mum's side. So I always really love to acknowledge her. She was my rock in terms of my cultural identity, as I grew up in a place that wasn't really embracing of difference, and it was a bit hard growing up as an Indigenous First Nations woman in a place that didn't accept it. So my journey along the way has helped me rediscover my culture, rediscover my language, and rediscover my identity. And in my acknowledgement there, I spoke in the Woiwurrung language, and the Woiwurrung language is not spoken fluently by anyone, sadly. And that goes the same for the 38 different language groups in Victoria. There's no fluent speakers because for at least 3 generations in my family, in my community, there was no speakers. We weren't allowed to speak language. We weren't allowed to practice culture or do ceremony or dance or anything like that. So we're in a revival mode at the moment, which makes it really, really important in terms of planning and developing to include our voice, because it's been excluded for so long. And it's something that I've got my foot in many doors. I do a lot of different things, as mentioned, but I think one of my most important roles is a community mentor for young girls in my community and in other First Nations communities, where I teach them how to be Aboriginal, I suppose, because when you're living in a dual world, you've got 2 different lives. You've got your cultural life, and then you've got your day-to-day life where you have to work, pay bills, go to school, all that stuff. So it's a really fine balance. And in terms of me living in Naarm, in Melbourne, in the outskirts of Melbourne for, a lot of years now, I've watched it grow. I've watched it be developed. I've watched it actually spread across country. In a way that it's like a cancer that's spreading across the land. And that's the only way that I can describe it, because it's encroaching on everything. But then on the flip side of that development, movement into the future, many people moving into the area. So I'm not saying it's a terrible thing, but in terms of that planning and developing, you need to include the first peoples, the first culture of this country. And when I say country, I mean Australia, but when I say countries, that's when I mean language, local language group areas. So like I said, there's 38 different language groups in Victoria, which is heaps for such a small state. And it's something that when I think my job in part of all those different roles that I do is reminding people to look deeper, to remember to look up into the sky, look at the stars, learn about the narratives that are connected to the stars, look at stories and creation narratives of the area that you live in. And one of my main points was discover or learn whose land or country, so language group area you're on and where you work, where your projects will be. And I think something that's really important about that, learning that, you'll learn that place names where you've lived all your life or that are very well known. Like an example of that is like Aboriginal names. They come from First Nations names. So Geelong, for example, is Gilang, means tongue. We've got Bullen in Gippsland, means lyrebird. So it's something you've got to learn what country you live on and learn about the language names, delve into what they actually mean. So that's my first take-home point. My second one is art styles. This is really important because art styles aren't the same throughout Australia. They are very different. They are very regionally based. They tell the narrative of that particular area. So, for example, I couldn't go to Queensland or Northern Territory and do my style of art because we're carvers. We carve into wood. We don't do desert art, which is dot art. We don't do the X-ray art. So when you look at the different art styles of, if you come across something on Google, you'll know that all the symmetrical lines, diamond motifs are all from Southeastern Australia. All the dot art is from Central Australia and all the X-ray art is from Northern Australia. So get that swirling in your mind that there's different art styles, and that tells the story of that particular place. So if you were to do a massive project, you were building a suburb and the main centerpiece was a sculpture or a mural with Central Desert artwork, that doesn't fit because it doesn't tell the story of place. So that was my second take-home point. My third one is art shouldn't be used just for its aesthetic appeal. It must have that local narrative. So I've already talked about it, but I think the difference, you've got to understand the difference between a local Aboriginal person and a local traditional custodian or traditional owner. I prefer to use traditional custodian because it's our job to have custodial rights and care for country that is our country. And we are at the time now where this country, generally Australia country, is a shared journey with the First Peoples of this country. So it's something that you need to define the difference between a local Aboriginal person and a traditional custodian, because the local Aboriginal person doesn't necessarily mean that they're the traditional custodian of that area. So Naarm or Melbourne, the meaning of Naarm actually means scrubland, and that's connected to one of our creation narratives of that beautiful river. So that's a whole other story that I could talk about all day, but see, place names are really important. And the last part of that point 3 was, when you're doing your projects, don't consult. We are the most consulted people in the world, but the outcome doesn't show that, because consultation means ticking a box. Yep, I've spoken to an elder. One elder doesn't represent the whole community. Collaboration, you cannot misunderstand or misinterpret the word collaboration, because you're on that journey together. The most important part of that journey is the beginning, getting to know each other, and the person, or wherever you're doing your artwork, say, I'll just say Naarm, Melbourne, if you're doing artwork there, you create a relationship with the Wurundjeri people, and then your journey isn't in a straight line like this. It can't be in a straight line, because if you're started here, you're creating that relationship. That's the longest part of the project. Then you're heading forward, then you go backwards, then you go up here, then you pause, then you go back to the start, because there's sorry business or something happening where projects can be halted for months. And sadly, a lot of our people pass away quite often. So you're back here again. So then you start again. And the main point of this journey is to gain trust of the community, because again, we don't want all of our knowledge just taken for the glory of, look at this building that we designed with that ticked box. So we're moving forward in our journey. Then again, we go back, and then it's all over the place like this, and eventually get to the end. But the end of the project isn't the end of the relationship. So you've got to continue that relationship, that respectful relationship with the community, because you can't use a community for an outcome. You've got to work together to create a mutually beneficial outcome and futuristic outcome with them as well. So they were my 3 points. And now I'm going to share my screen. Oops, share. So this picture in the background is something that I did. It was over, as you can see, from 2019 or late 2019. Mind you, late 2019 was a hot, rainy, haily, cold, all the different weather that we have in Naarm. It just hit me. I was painting in hail and everything, but luckily this piece of the project was on a decal, and it was stuck onto the roof panels. And this was a really good example of collaboration, because the architects, this was actually through, the name of the company is the one that did the beautiful artwork on the huge Qantas aeroplane, Beringa, I think it is. And they got involved. I think they just saw my website. They got me involved in this project, and I went and met with the architects. I met with them, and I said, okay, right. And they took me on a tour of the shell of this place as it was getting built, through all the construction zone. And the thing that stood out for me was when I looked to the east, and you could see Koranwarrabul. And Koranwarrabul is the name for Mount Dandenong. So you can just see on the top of this image the wavy line, that wavy line that goes through the middle, and the circles within that. That represents the top of the Koranwarrabul, and also the circles represent the water that runs off. So usually my artwork revolves around welcome, like his gum leaves, water, rivers. That's really one of the most important things, water, because it's part of every element that is part of us. So this is all about that narrative of how Naarm or Narm, which is Port Phillip Bay, which means much scrubland, was filled with water. The river, long story short, the river was created and it flooded the plains down at Port Phillip Heads, which used to be flat scrubland. And you can see animal footprints there. You can see emu and kangaroo. So our stories, our creation narratives tell us this. And then there's examples of our style of artwork. So these little semicircles, these little diamond motifs, they're all derived from Barak or William Barak's carved shields, boomerangs and things like that. So I've gone right to the source because he is my third great uncle and I need to be able to speak for him now because he can't. So I speak for him through visual artwork. So this is all about the rain coming down, water flowing off the top of the mountain into the Yarra eventually. So cotton wattable actually means cotton means to grow, or cotton means to grow, and wattable means two, and it's got two peaks. So there's another example of using language. Just see if I can go to my next slide. And this was done out, this is the part that I did in the rain and hail and heat and sunset and early morning. I was there for hours and hours, but I smashed it out in about 14 days. And it was something that I had to hand draw and then hand paint. But the thing that stood out for me with this is people would stop and say how beautiful it was, and little things like bees and ladybugs, they'd just come and land on me. And I'm like, this reminds me of all this built environment. It takes me back to what's underneath the ground. So this artwork is a depiction of the 6 layers of Wurundjeri country. So you've got the Bikut, the below country, where we dig the ground for ochre, and plants, the roots go into the ground. So there's all these different elements. I'll give you the quick version. So then you've got the Bikdui, which is the on country, where you live them 2 lives. You live it, you do your work and go to school, but also your cultural life, which is ceremony, dance, and community roles. Then we've got Banyabik, the water country, and that forms part of every element of country, and our bodies, the plants, everything around us, all the way down to water vapor, which is up in the stars. So all of those different layers have water. Then we've got Murunmutbik, which is the wind country, and smoke from our welcoming fires blows from the fire into every element around us. We breathe it into our bodies. It absorbs into our hair and our clothes. Will smell like smoke forever. I love the smell of that smoke, and it has healing properties in it. So the oil in the gum leaves has healing properties. And then above that is Wurundjeri, the sky country. So Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle, and Wa the raven, his helper. He's the creator, Bunjil. So he is in his physical form, flying on those thermals, watching and guiding us from there. But his spiritual form is up in the stars. So we've got him up there with his helpers, Jert, Tara, we've got Dandan, Yukop, all the birds, and Dajari, the possum, they all up there in the stars, part of the Southern Cross. And also Altair is Bunjil with the 2 stars either side of him, Gunawara, his wives, the black swan. So all of those different layers put together into a visual form helps people to look at things differently, gets them to ask questions like, wow, what is this all about? It's not just something that's aesthetically pretty. So that was the point of doing that one out the front. And I told them, yeah, do like perforated something with lighting in the back. And they go, yeah. Oh, it's just a little bit too expensive. So can you come and paint it? And I'm like, oh my goodness, like in the middle of my PhD. So still doing my PhD, nearly there. And this was another part of that project. So this is on the flip side on the back there. So if you're standing where I am in the photo, there's a heap of, you can just see the corner of one on the side there, apartment buildings. So it's a really community-based hub. And they wanted something that made them feel welcome and engaged. So this design here on the stairs represents the managum flower. So the colours in the background represent the ochre colours that I get from Wurundjeri country. So we can get bright reds, we can get browns, we can get the rusty yellows. But the managum flower is that symbol of welcome because, like I said earlier, gum leaves are often part of my artwork, but I did a little bit something different here and used the flower because the flower represents renewal and springtime and happiness, and the days are getting longer, but also represents that you are welcome in this community hub from the first culture of this area. So you can see that the whole project was a collaborative work. And I'm friends with all those guys now. They ring me and say, oh, can you come in and do a talk here and there? And I'm friends with them because I said to them, look, if you just want to do the front, yeah, that's good. But why don't you take the artwork inside the building and make it a full project? And then eventually they came to me in 2021 to do this piece out the back. So I'm not sure about how my time's going, but I'll leave it there because I know I can speak a lot, and we'll leave it open for questions later on. So I'll just unshare my screen. And thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Landy. I think we're especially fortunate to have a Wurundjeri perspective, and the way that you speak about the richness and the many encompassing things. I think the notion of being able to tell a complete story from so many various perspectives, and talking about creation narratives, and then giving us tangible examples of how you've done that, talking to the relational process and the importance of getting to know each other as a fundamental thing, and how this is an evolutionary journey of creating something. I think that just reminds us of the creation story that we're on when we're doing development. I think you noted about encroaching on everything. And if we start to understand country from this perspective of creation and the value of elemental notions of the things that you've discussed, as much as the people, the place and the country, the language groups, and the specific notions of what local place means, what country we're living on, what country we're working on, and really acknowledging local narratives and traditional custodians, as you emphasize, custodians perhaps rather than owners, in terms of the care for country that's involved with making the big decisions that we're making around how we inhabit country. So thank you once again for that. And I think the crossover point I noted was you said the flower represents renewal, and the next speaker that we have is Dr. Dominique Hes, and she's going to be talking about regeneration. So Dr. Dominique Hes is an internationally renowned educator, researcher, and author in regenerative design. Her qualifications span science, engineering, and architecture, and she has co-authored, as we mentioned before, an award-winning book called Designing for Hope, Pathways to Regenerative Sustainability, as well as 6 other books and over 100 papers. The Designing for Hope book grew out of her research into why, when we've been doing sustainability for so long, are we still having an ever-increasing negative impact? Why is it so difficult to be a thriving part of the Earth system? This is a very big and poignant question, and how the built environment could better contribute to the natural ecology of place and also to that thriving, which we aspire towards. This book then led her to explore biomimicry, biophilia, regenerative design, permaculture, and positive development in greater depth. Dominique is an amazing communicator, and we're also very thankful to have you as a speaker today. So I'll leave it over to you, Dominique, to present your presentation on regenerative design and changing future of work. Thank you.
Mute. Yes. Hi. Just checking that you can see my screen and unmuting. All right. I think we've had enough about my background, but I would also like to add my voice to the others and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay Jury-Brook or respect to the elders, to them and their elders past and present. I'm really thankful and blessed to be able to learn from the oldest continuous culture on this planet. And acknowledge that their lands were never ceded and no treaty has ever been signed. I particularly acknowledge the living waters, particularly coming from the last speaker, the Miringanay-Benong, which flows into the Nurm, Port Phillip Bay, and my local mountain here behind me, the Werdi Yuangs. I live in the city of Hobson's Bay, on the lands of the Yulut Woolum, which means river camp, and I'm just near the bluestone quarry that has been turned into a thriving community area of Newport Lakes. We've had enough of that. So today I'm just giving a quick introduction to regenerative practice. What is it? How is it part of the shifting worldviews? A quick case study and just a check-in with COVID. So to explain what regenerative practice is and why it's different, it's really about the intent of your practice. And to understand that, we need to understand how our worldview is changing. And so most of you will be aware of the innovation S-curve So human development, we're trundling along, everything's working happily in a specific way, then we realise there's something wrong, or there's something better out there, or there is some sort of crisis that we weren't expecting because of the way we were behaving and issues that we need to deal with, and that leads to innovation. That develops, and then we're happily trundling along, and then something goes wrong and off we go. So that's the innovation cycle that we've had throughout time, which has led to layers of how we engage with the reality of the world and try and make sense of that. Now, Jan Rothmans out of the Netherlands talks about this in terms of sustainability, and saying that what we're seeing right now is this tipping point where we're seeing the limitations of the old ways of doing things. And by the old ways, I mean the Industrial Revolution ways, and we're coming back and learning from the past acknowledgement, connection to country ways, and saying, well, what could we do that will address the issues? But we're in a point of uncertainty where we really don't know what the future will look like. We're just seeing the problems. And so the best way for me to explain how that is shifting is through this well-known saying, give a person a fish and they will eat for a day. Teach them how to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime. Well, at least they will until the fish run out. And so when we're looking at Jan Rothmans and the S innovation curve, and we're at this point where we're starting to see the limitations and this opportunity for innovation, we're thinking about what this new thing is. What is this new thing if it's not about giving a man a fish and it's not about teaching him to fish? What is the next worldview in which we're moving? And my work and those of many others are actually reflecting back the original ideas of country, but it's really teaching the person, the man, the woman, everybody to love the ocean, and they will both thrive. And that's the critical change in worldview that I see is emerging. We're starting to really see the limitations of the extractive relationship we've had with the world, and we're starting to ask, how do we start shifting that to a relationship that's based on love and understanding and connection? And so the shift is going from transactional, which is where we see the exploitation and the transaction in how we deal with the world, to what we would say is more relational, or more that Indigenous approach to really having a deep understanding and love of each other and of place, and building that long-term narrative together. But it's not just relational, right? Because we didn't forget to farm just because we went into the steam age and the iron age and so forth, right? We remember everything, we take everything along with us. And so I would argue that it's actually relational incorporating the transactional. So we're learning from the last 500 years of our extractive mentality, and we're moving forward and taking the things that are of benefit to the future relationship together and an understanding of place, physics and so forth, giving us a very nuanced way of understanding place that adds to that ability to love and care for place. And so what does practice look like in this world that's shifting from teach them to fish to loving the ocean? And this is a great photo of a placemaking activity out of Sydney, and the 20-minute neighbourhoods is all about returning that love of place to understanding your local place, and placemaking is a critical part of that journey. But we're talking design, urban development and so forth, so I'm going to give you a little example of a project that I've been working on with many, many others, and I've only had a small role, called the Paddock. So the Paddock, the design, it's 27 homes where it's Living Building Challenge, based on Living Building Challenge. They're healthy, they're lots of recycled materials, they're energy positive. But we've also we did citizen science work on the site to start with, and we looked at what were the ecological aspects that we could do. How can we build life for people, as well as the legless lizard, the powerful owl, the golden sun moth, the growling grass frog, and the very cute sugar glider? How do we create a thriving habitat for them as well as for people? And 3 of those species have been sighted, including an echidna, which we didn't even design for, but he's come back and moved in as well. And so it's very much possible to design to bring back nature and to create thriving living places. And the community that lives here really thrived through COVID because they were able to come together and support each other within this sense of caring for place. But that's the design, right? That's not the relational thing that I've been talking about, the shift. So how do we embody a care and a love of place? And so this is the kind of initial concept of the site. This is an example of how the community has really started to care and embody their roles. So they are learning what are the native grasses to support and what are the weeds to pull out, and they're actively involved in the caring for country. But also within the design, we have 5 different views that come through into the site, and each of these views will be celebrating a different period in history. So celebration of the Dja Dja Wurrung, celebration of the agricultural, the gold mining era, the current kind of quirky, arty, musicy, foodie era, and the future. The relational and the relational aspect of this, though, is that the community themselves are curating those spaces. It's not to us as designers, us as developers, to say, this is what you will do. It's up to them to commission the art, to create the stories that will enable people to live every day through those different views into the story of this site. And, you know, there's other things as designers you can put in a communal laundry and you can put in shelves, but it's the community that then takes the how do they put that into place, the sharing of materials, the recycling, the enabling of how they are in this place. So we are at this tipping point. I've given you an example. We're shifting from clearing the ocean out to actually loving it and asking what's our role in helping it thrive. But what does that mean in the period of COVID? It is another symptom of the old way not working and the need to enable systems within our way of living to work together to address these issues. So what does that mean for us as designers, as practitioners in this? So I would say, and we've seen another symptom of this, which is the Great Resignation, whereas a lot of people are leaving their old jobs and looking for new ways of contributing to the world. And they're looking for, what I'm arguing for is this relationality, this ability to really connect deeply, to have meaning, belonging, attachment. And so as we see the consequences of the periods that we're living in and the reasons for that, it really is for you guys as practitioners, for you guys as developers, to really think about how do I bring that relationality, that ability to love the place of where I'm building the building. And it was so wonderful to see the brickworks up there, to really bring that ability to connect in with place, to celebrate and to feel agency for those who will be using your developments into the future, so that they can curate their own celebrations of place, so that they can feel empowered to and celebrate when, you know, those species come back. That is the opportunity, because if we create a love of place, a sense of connection and attachment, then people will return and they will work with us to create a thriving future. So my 3 points are, remember, we are on this S-curve of innovation, and we're currently in that initial stage of the early adopters of seeing the issues and starting to drive the potential for the future. Think about in your own projects how to build connection, agency, and build relationship with place and each other. And that meaning is critical. We're seeing that through this COVID period. We're seeing it through the Great Resignation. It is time in all of our practices, in all of our companies, to bring that sense of being able to contribute, that agency into the outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dominic. It's really amazing, I think, being able to see the common thread, even just from the 3 speakers today so far, and to be able to know that for many of us that are working in practice in new town design or urban design or architecture or whatever it is that we're all involved in, how we can already start to see some of these points that Dr. Dominic has noted there, that we are at a tipping point. And that recent report that I mentioned at the start is something we all need to really take note of. And while we're all fairly distracted, understandably, by COVID, how do we get into actually resolving and addressing some of these tipping points issues? Because I personally feel we have a real responsibility as professionals, and the research and the expertise that we're hearing from this morning, I think is really poignant. And I think that idea of being able to work in the context that we do, which will be a great segue to our next speaker, but this idea of transactional and relational and understanding that connection to country. I know I learned something so far about the meaning of Hobson's Bay at River Camp. It's just really nice to be able to realise the richness that we can continue to bring to projects and to relationships and to our own community. So I think it's a really good segue then to our next speaker. So thank you, Dr. Dominic there. It's really important information that I think will blend seamlessly into our next presenter with Ludo Campbell-Reid, where we can see the real challenge on an urban scale to be able to start to implement some of these discussion points we're hearing this morning. So Ludo is a city planner, urban designer, and a keynote speaker with over 28 years of experience advising communities, developers, mayors, cities, local authorities and governments around the world on how to improve the livability of their cities, streets and open spaces. So he spent his early career in Cape Town working on master planning of the Victoria and Alfred waterfront, and as the chief urban designer to the Cape Town Olympic Bid Company. In London, he was responsible for urban design, architecture and urban development activity at Canary Wharf, and later he became the CEO of Urban Design London, established by the UK government to raise urban design quality across the city. In 2006, he became Auckland's first ever design champion, where he and his team had accountability for the urban design-led renaissance of Auckland. And in 2016, Auckland was highly commended in the Lee Kuan Yew World Cities Prize. And many may have already heard this, but in 2021, the Economist survey ranked Auckland as the world's most livable city. And sadly, if you did notice that, Melbourne dropped down a little bit on that list. So Ludo is now the newly appointed Director of City Design and Livability at Wyndham City Council, currently the fastest growing municipality in Victoria and the second fastest in Australia. So he's always an inspiring speaker. In fact, the first time I ever heard about Ludo was when we were working over in New Zealand, and he was described to me as the rock star of urban design. So with that, I'll pass it over to Ludo to talk around towards regenerative cities. Thanks, Ludo.
Oh, good. Well, what an introduction. Thank you, Dean. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to Dean and to Hayley for putting on this event. It's fantastic. In the spirit of reconciliation, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the peoples of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which Wyndham is being built. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and I join you today from Geelong and acknowledge the Wadawurrung people as the traditional owners of the land on which I'm presenting today. So I'm super privileged to be here today, and really I'm sort of kind of excited to, I've learned so much just in the presentations we've heard from Dominique and the team and Mandy. So I'm going to talk to you all about sort of regenerative cities. That's been my brief, and I've got 10 minutes. So I better get a move on. I think I can't talk about cities without showing you this slide. And really, this is the challenge that we're talking about. This is the great urban challenge, the urbanization, the urban growth per hour across the world. This is an old slide now, actually, and so many of these numbers have been superseded. But look at Africa, and look at Kinshasa and Lagos and places like that. In 1950, Kinshasa was 200,000 people. It's now 15 million people. The world is changing. This is our greatest challenge. And why? I mean, I would say that climate change, not COVID, is the bigger threat. And why? Because, whilst the world only covers, or cities cover only 1% of the world's population and 1% of the world's surface area, they emit 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions that cause global warming, and they consume 75% of the world's global energy. So the way we design our cities absolutely matters, and the way in which we work as practitioners, as public, with the private sector, with governments, could not be more important. This is the great crisis of our times. But the procrastination just goes on and on and on. And these are some discourses of the climate delay. Everybody's got an excuse. And it's almost like the crisis isn't big enough or isn't present enough. And so rather than focusing on all the problems, I think that this is from a website called Greater Auckland, who've been a fantastic advocacy team in New Zealand when I was there, and really pushing that agenda of discourse and discussion, that collaboration. And so really what I think is important is what we need is a new plan. A bit like Mandy was saying and Dominique was saying, we need a new plan for our cities as we move forward. And maybe a regenerative city plan for Melbourne, and based on Indigenous concepts and values. And for me, you know, the regenerative city program is relatively new, but conceptually I understand, but it's about giving examples of real life case studies around how we think about this. But ultimately, it's about leaving the world, it's about sort of restoring, it's about repair, it's about supercharging life. And in many respects, it's about leaving the world in a more healthy than when you found it. So, you know, legislation is changing or every day around this, and even in New Zealand, the government invested in a new well-being budget, looking beyond sustainability, which is rather narrow, oddly enough, to a much more broader concept of well-being and restorativeness. And there's, you know, we're meant to be the most intelligent species that's ever inhabited the earth, you know, but I often see very little evidence of it. You know, the regenerative cities continuum really takes sustainability to that next level, a much broader model of urban development, that sense of regenerating natural resources and recognizing that we're already compromising the needs of our future generations. So it's really about the concept of really looking into the future. And it's really that sense, as Mandy and Dominique talked about, it was really that sense of the circular economy, rather than that sense of that linear movement from one to the next, but actually the repeat, recycle, restore and repeat, and keep doing that. A bit like Mandy was explaining around how you consult and how you collaborate with Indigenous people. It's back and forward. It's kind of looking back. It's going forward. It's a multi-pronged approach. And there are many examples around the world, and many of these are well known to you all, but some of the larger introductions into urban cities in Korea, the Cheongcheong River in downtown Seoul, the replacement of the old motorway systems and the repatriation of a new stream and river walkways, and even in Utrecht, where in the Netherlands, where the old city has got its moat back. I mean, the amount of money that they spent building the new infrastructure, not only then to knock it all down and start again. In some respects, you know, with me, I feel like, you know, cities, it's not about brave new world. It's very much back to the future. And so what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about sort of some of the regenerative work that we did in Auckland when I was the sort of design champion there for 13 years. My team, the Auckland Design Office, we believe that Māori Indigenous design needed to be pervading through everything that we did. The city needed to reflect its place, its culture, its people. But we spoke to Māori and to mana whenua, who are the traditional people of the land, you know, and they didn't see themselves in the city that they saw emerging. And so our mission then became to really provide a genuine manifestation of the First Peoples' concepts, values, and visions within the city that we were building together with them. And what's interesting with Māori design, and Hayley will know this, so we worked together back in Auckland, but regenerative design, the principle of regenerative cities are really central to Te Reo Māori, to the Māori worldview. The core elements of that concept is this concept called kitiangitanga, a system that is really designing a city, a place that is at peace with the environment within which it sits. It's that preventing intrusions that cause permanent damage, that sense of balance, that sense of custodianship, that sense of guardianship. And really what we are saying is that the people working in the governments, in the councils, the planning, the architectural professional communities, the community, they are all custodians of this. And we introduced a concept called Tiaranga design principles, which we then applied to every single capital program that we were able to over the period of time. It wasn't everything, but it was really about the future. And these concepts were then applied to the projects that we delivered. And this was one of the projects which started the process off. This idea that the Māori outcomes or a thriving Māori community is Auckland's point of difference in the world. And really we aim to bring that sense of identity and personality and culture into the city centre, and really confirm that city centre was the traditional origin point of Auckland, which we then, as Mandy was talking about, understood the original name for Auckland is Tamaki. And Tamaki Makaurau, the city desired by many because of its beauty and its bounty. And so what we work with a range of incredible designers, a co-designed approach with Mana Whenua, the people of the land, with Auckland Council, with Auckland Transport, and a whole collective of designers. We worked around a new concept of bringing Māori sort of to understand that they could see their places and their faces in the places that we were building. And one of the really interesting concepts was this idea was not to be just sustainable, but to be restorative. And so that concept of regenerative cities was brought through. One of the ideas that emerged and was actually built through was the idea of, in Te Wangananga, which was this new waterfront public space, was the idea of mussel ropes. Single mature mussel can clean up to 150, 200 litres of seawater a day. So imagine the opportunity to enhance the Māori, the life force of the harbour by harnessing the power of traditional Mataronga Māori knowledge and bringing those traditional concepts into the 21st century and using those to provide a place that is not only beautiful, but is restorative. And that was a really important piece of work that was done and has just been built out in Auckland this year. Another project was the Te Aonga Awa naturalisation, which was a $25 million project which to naturalise 1.5 kilometres of the Te Awa River, which was part of a stormwater system which was blocked up, and this was now revealed, open-aired in many respects. The incredible restoration of this creek, biologically, naturally, and a great collaboration between public, private, community, and local Māori and Mana Whenua. So an incredible role of really telling that story of the world's largest Polynesian city and seeing these true life manifestations. And the last project, which really was probably the largest regenerative program in Auckland, which was a 10-year program of the waterfront, a 35-hectare brownfield regeneration site on the fringe of the city, some severely contaminated land with large tanks, oil tanks and so forth, biodiversity restored, ecology restored, reduction in greenhouse emissions from energy and transport respectively. There was a concept around targeting 70% of commute trips made by walking, cycling or public transport, and Auckland Transport have based their 2,500-3,000 staff on Wynyard Quarter achieving a 91% mode shift. So there's a real opportunity to do this transformation, and here was the before and the after. An incredible change, a restorative, regenerative place with people at the heart. This concept, and you can see at the North Point, the tanks have now been removed, and a new park is underway, restoring that land as it used to be, putting back and making the place more healthy than it was. So in the last few minutes, I just wanted to say something about COVID. I mean, COVID has been absolutely brutal, but in many respects, it has also shown us just how good our cities can be. More natural, more walkable, more cyclable, less polluted, and more local. James talked about those earlier. And it's really interesting, as we travel and we listen to projects all around the world, you just see these incredible opportunities. Some have seized the moment, but actually many have not. And there's this sense of building back better, but not many places are actually doing that. In fact, there's this crisis, I believe, of this sense of, in some respects, indecent haste, this indecent haste to get back to how it used to be. But it's really interesting, what sort of cities did we have before? They were still polluted. And so what I'm seeing is cities trying to build back what they had before, in places like Shanghai, the traffic congestion is worse than it was before COVID because not many people are on public transport. So we really have to think about a new paradigm. And there was a wonderful studies in Vilnius, in Lithuania, around introducing the idea of an open air cafe to bring people back to the city, providing residents and cafe owners and the businesses with public health workers were given 400,000 euros to spend locally. So they basically transformed the streets, places for vehicles, into places for people, and really used that as a gesture of thanks and a stimulus to the city's struggling business community. And I suppose the question was asked of me before the presentation was, are COVID responses enough to reboot us, to regenerate us? Well, I think, spoiler alert, no. Many COVID placemaking measures were temporary, unfortunately, and there's been much haste to just reinstate business as usual once the immediate crisis has gone. In Auckland, I left last year, all the Auckland measures except one part of Queen Street have now been withdrawn. But what has changed? There is good news, and James mentioned this, working from home allows much more time for life. Employers actually trust people working from home or actually working from home. People have discovered their local communities, local economies and centres have benefited dramatically by this sort of the relocalization, almost the suburban urbanization. But the bad news is urban cores have struggled. Congestion is back with a vengeance. Public transport struggling to recover to pre-COVID levels, especially for longer journeys. We seem to have forgotten the benefits of that quiet, low polluted, low carbon, low traffic neighbourhoods. So what are the opportunities for Melbourne? Well, I would suggest that Melbourne City Centre needs to emphasise its role as the core, the centre of Melbourne, with unparalleled access from the entire metropolitan area. It needs to supercharge walking and cycling as attractive and safe options for journeys. And my view is that it should focus now on local, not international brands, not tourism, but provide amenities and services that communities in Melbourne want in their neighbourhoods, such as butchers, bakers, hardware stores. Well, how many hardware stores are there in downtown Melbourne? A post office. These are the things that I think we should be focusing on. Focus on local. And in terms of the local communities and growth areas, a huge opportunity to provide a polycentric city, a collaborative region where we work together to revitalize struggling main streets, to retrofit communities that were designed for cars into communities designed for people, from the lens of universal design and all ages and abilities. Plant trees, make walking and cycling more attractive and safe options for many journeys. And really the key is fostering that local co-working hubs where staff don't have to travel to the city, but actually can work more locally. So instead of working from home, we work close to home. And so these are the opportunities for collaboration and innovation. So the last slide really is just to say, the stepping stones, the pandemic has shown our ability to react quickly in a state of emergency. We're good at that, but we're not good at maintaining it. But the entire planet is in a state of emergency, yet we appear to be unable to act decisively around these things to address climate urgency. Where is that urgency? Our communities and cities seem to be more degenerative than regenerative. And so the first step is acknowledge we have the problem. The second step is to stop making excuses for inaction. And third is to act decisively to address the problem. Regenerative cities are climate-friendly cities. And this means that regenerative cities must be a must-do, not an option. And then lastly, vote. Vote for the people that you want to lead us out of this, because this is the key going forward. So at the end of the day, it's all about people. And this is a William Shakespeare quote, what is the city but the people? And understanding people will understand us how to build more livable, more human-centered cities. And eventually the world will be better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ludo. It's a really interesting presentation, and I know some of that thinking in those areas that you're challenged by. I guess I have the opportunity to know firsthand some of the impact you're bringing into the city of Wyndham as well, and perhaps in the discussion panel coming up, you might be able to touch on that a bit more as well, because I think you raised some really interesting points there, that if we're able to move towards this idea of regenerative cities, many general population might not understand that difference from regenerative, but I think that idea of being able to think we've got to move from just greenwash from decades ago And even it's not just good enough to be sustainable anymore, where it's just maintaining the status quo because we're technically still going backwards.
Yeah.
How can we collectively move towards this more regenerative approach? And it's around that circular economy that you talk about, that it is going to take a bigger shift, that tipping point, as Dominic talked about, that we need to be able to embrace. And I think the thread, as I mentioned before, is really interesting, seeing that what James had been talking around, that 20 minutes neighbourhood is tying into that, even at a scale of cities or local neighbourhoods, and the connection to place that Mandy touched on, and the regenerative tipping point that Dominic has so clearly articulated there. And then Ludo, I think the work that you're doing to be able to bring that into this major urban scale, to be able to see this significant change, yet it comes down to small implementation. I love the example you gave of the mussels, a beautiful restorative project that doesn't have to be rocket science. There's simple things where we need to just better connect to local place, local country. And you use a term there that I can talk about as well, as just, we're just got to go back to the future. It's not about new urbanism as such. It's going back to classic urbanism and the things that worked, and the things that people love around local, walkable, connected, so we can build back better. So there's so many opportunities. So what I want to highlight also is that I believe some of the screenshots might be coming through a bit pixelated, but we will have the slides available after as well. And I will also, as I start to introduce Misha in a moment, is also just encourage people to get online, and you can post some questions in the Q&A box that should be there on your screens as well, because we'd love to be able to hear your questions direct and be able to, we've got a good bit of time now to be able to chat with the panelists and have some good conversation. So that brings me to, so firstly, thank you, Ludo, again for that. And now brings us to this panel discussion. And I'm delighted to be able to have Misha Ketchell moderating this session today. And we did hear a bit of his introduction at the start. And it will be with your help from your questions. So please do keep them coming in. And Misha will be able to weave as many of those in as he can to be able to get a really engaging conversation. Now, as just highlighted earlier, Misha is the editor and executive director of The Conversation. He has been the editor and journalist for more than 25 years, and has previously been the founding editor of The Big Issue Australia and editor of Crikey, The Reader, and The Melbourne Weekly. He was also a reporter and feature writer for The Age, and spent several years at the ABC, where he was a TV producer on Media Watch and the 7 to 30 Report, and an editor on The Drum. So it's exciting to now pass it over to you, Misha, and be able to kick off the panel discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dean. I'd like to just start with some acknowledgements. And first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I am zooming in very cloudy Brunswick, the Wurundjeri people. I'd also like to acknowledge the hosts of our event today and all the speakers. I thought that was incredibly inspiring to hear at a time when I think we're all feeling quite depressed with this sort of ongoing lockdown. It was so lovely to hear 4 speakers who are thinking so creatively and positively about ways of doing things better rather than merely just defining problems and talking about what's wrong. So thank you so much. It was great to hear. And I've got so many questions, so I think I'll just start. I'll throw questions to different members, different speakers, and I'll try to pick up questions from the audience as well as we go. But I want to start by going back to James Mant's talk about the 20-minute neighbourhood, which just sounded like such a lovely idea. Like, it sounded like such a wonderful way of thinking about an urban environment and living and getting about. But I was wondering about what the barriers are to it and why you think maybe car-based design thinking is so difficult to disrupt. Like, why is it that we are sort of struggling to implement some of these ideas? Could you maybe talk about some of the challenges you face in sort of entrenched thinking?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I've got a little example of how difficult things get. We had a pilot program, and I won't name the council, but we spent a couple of years on this project, and we had the grand vision, and we presented the 20-minute neighbourhood concept, and there was a lot of interest and across council. We got a lot of buy-in, and following the pilot, we talked about what are the interventions we can make locally to implement this. And so we held a meeting, and this was after, you know, we'd spent $100,000 of government money investing into this project, and we were really excited about what are the practical things we can do, like these sort of interventions behind me. And to cut a long story short, we actually ended up arguing about losing one car parking spot, and actually I lost. So I kind of left the meeting feeling a little bit uninspired and a bit depressed, because the reality is, you know, when you're dealing with these issues directly, it can become quite difficult to change the mindset around car parking or road space or traffic, and actually, you know, it just demonstrates the challenge that we have, I suppose. Not everyone thinks this way, and not everyone sees things in the same way, and you really need to get one of the things we did with the pilot, which was really good, was we got lots of different parts of councils and the community together to understand what the vision was, and I think that really helped kind of work on the implementation, because people could see that their role was about delivering a part of this idea of 20-minute neighbourhoods. But I think, you know, it's just a challenge, because not everyone thinks the same. People have different priorities. People think people want certain things and they don't. You know, it's kind of that I think is one of the biggest barriers. And you know, we've had a system where we've really planned around car-based travel for quite a long time now. So it's changing that system. It's small steps, but we're going in the right direction. And I think, as was mentioned in some of the other presentations, the impact of COVID has really made people think quite differently about place. So I think it's an opportunity, a great opportunity.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that, because Dominic talked about, you know, the idea that COVID might create a greater desire for employees to stay home, for example, and that might, I think, to some extent mean that people can think differently about their sense of place and how they move about in their sense of place. Do you have any sort of specific ideas about how you might harness that energy? Are there any sort of projects you're working on where you can use that specifically?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're working constantly and thinking about new ideas as to how we can capitalise on this opportunity. You know, from a state government perspective, getting different parts of government on board. I mean, there was a lot of investment, as lots of people know, in the public dining and the street improvements and activations. How do we actually make those permanent? I think Ludo mentioned there was a lot of these have been temporary, but what, you know, we've got a great opportunity to test and go, do they work? Generally speaking, people love them. How do we then make it permanent? So we've been doing that in the pilot neighbourhoods. We've done the temporary activations. Now we're looking at how do we make those permanent and you know, make change permanent from this. So we're looking to work with councils going forward to help enable that. But yeah, it's a really good point, and one that we are thinking about constantly and trying different things. Some things work, some things don't. So
yeah. Misha, I just wondered if I could jump in, if you don't mind. I just think, you know, James is absolutely on the money. You know, I've been here a year and a half and been learning a lot about Australia and New Zealand and the comparisons in Melbourne. You know, it's taken us a long time to build the city that we have. It's taken 100 years, and so the city that is a result of a whole range of things: policies, directions, politics, taxes, changes to policy directions. We created the city that we have, so we can uncreate and we can recreate by changing those levers. But, you know, it's if you think about budgets, where do all the budgets go? You know, as Biden said one year in a speech, you know, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. Where is the budget for the things that we talk about around the Plan Melbourne outcomes? We need those budgets, and we need to stop building more and more roads to recovery, but rail to recovery, and transit lanes and bike lanes. The mayor of Paris is building 1,000 kilometers of activated cycleways as a result of the pandemic. How many are we building here in Melbourne? You know, we've increased our active transport budget in Wyndham by 400% this year as a response to the need to get people cycling and walking, but what's the equivalent at the broader level? So I think we're missing the health outcomes are inextricably linked with the planning outcomes. The two things have to be done in concert. You know, the housing, unsequenced land release over the whole broader metropolitan Melbourne creates real problems. No coordinated delivery, the planning powers aren't strong enough, policy is not nimble enough. You know, it's easy for 20-minute neighbourhoods in the inner cities of Melbourne, inner suburbs, but the west and the outer areas don't have these strong cores. So it's a really important thing. And I think we've got to start with the small examples of good practice, building momentum, building confidence, like James was talking about the parklets, really important to start that process. But it's a long game, but you've got to start the plan and you've got to have a plan at least. Yeah,
that's actually touches on one of the questions that somebody submitted, which is really asking about how you can implement sort of regenerative design when you're dealing at larger scale. So I think your point is a valid one, which is that you can do it in certain locations and we can see examples of it's happening. But overall, when you're dealing at scale, there can be, you know, challenges and problems. I'd like to move on to Mandy, to something that you said, which I thought was really, you know, quite telling, which was the importance of learning Aboriginal names and language and what that means for your sense of place. And it was so lovely to hear you talking about your artwork and the thinking behind it. And I would imagine that if, for example, you were, you know, close to those areas and experiencing them, it would be lovely for people to hear those stories. But how do they access that? I mean, how would people who are experiencing the Burwood brickwork get information about the story behind the creation of your art and what it means and how it sort of came together?
I think that the architects put a little package together, a little video package, when the shop was just about to be launched, or actually it was launched, and there was a little shop front that had a little bit of an exhibition about the artwork and me, and there was some photos in there. So that's a good question, because since it's been opened, I'm wondering, and that shop will be filled now, I'm wondering if they still have a permanent little display about the journey, not just the artwork, the journey to get to the final artwork is more important than the artwork itself. So that's a good question. I'm going to have to get onto them and see if they do have that there, because that goes against what I was talking about. If they don't have that narrative attached to it, it's just a piece of artwork.
Yeah, I guess, look, you know, in fairness, there are some people who love to experience art, you know, in a way of just a sort of an experiential way. I'm somebody who always likes to know the stories behind things. But I also feel that, like, sharing that story touches on that other point you're making about the need for people to learn Aboriginal names and language and actually have that as part of their sense of place. And I would imagine that having that story there enables people to access that sense of place, which would be important. My other question was, I don't know much about the Burwood brickwork, so I'm not quite sure exactly what the concept is behind it, but what's the level of sort of community access? I mean, how much does that sense of place extend to young people or other people in that community? How much can they access the work that you've done and that sort of centre?
Well, when I was doing the artwork itself, it just was really a shell of a shopping centre, and they put all the apartments in the back there, and I think they're going to also put like a community sort of hub a bit further down the slope. So it's an old, I actually put a little bit of an aspect of what the actual place was used for in the timeline as well, because ochre is basically clay, and the clay is what they use for the bricks. That used to be a brick factory there. So in terms of accessibility for all ages, it's got everything that a normal shopping centre has, but what jumped out at me was the rooftop. They've got some chooks up there. They've got like a herb garden, strawberries coming out of the walls, and you can pick them if you want. And there's a restaurant that uses that produce from the garden on the roof. So any age can go up there and enjoy like something that's sort of resonating with everyone that's speaking now is we're taking everything back to the way it was, back to growing things, back to experiencing, back to smelling, touching, seeing, feeling, rather than being distant from all that. And that's what this shopping centre rooftop gave me the feeling of, because you're going back to, your grandmother's veggie patch or the chooks, and things like that. So I think getting all the generations together to look at places like that and make them understand, like when we were growing up, there's a show on at the moment, I can't remember what it's called, but it's got different generations and which one's the best and which one had the best childhood. And it went through the timeline of children in the 60s, 70s, 80s up till now. And technology has just consumed these kids. They don't ride bikes. They don't go for walks. They don't go running around in the bush and playing Dungeons and Dragons or the community isn't safe anymore. Kids aren't kids anymore. So taking them back to that sort of stuff will help them have a little bit of an essence of what our childhood was like. And I think technology is a good thing, but it also is a really, really detrimental thing to the development of children's playful mind, inquisitiveness, and connection to the actual, planting something in their garden, like little things like that. So the rooftop there gives me a little bit of a sense where kids and young adults can come and go, wow, this is pretty cool.
It sounds terrific. I just hope that it's not like my local shopping centre where there's security guards shooting young people away. If that philosophy runs all the way through, that would be terrific. That brings me to something that Dominic talked about, which I thought was a really important concept, about teaching people to love the ocean, this sort of idea of understanding place and then that affection for place, enabling people to sort of behave more as custodians. And I loved the example you gave, Dominic, when you talked about these grasses and weeds and helping people in the community identify which ones to keep and which ones, you would want to remove. That really sort of connects with that idea of custodianship and also sort of inviting people to be part of that custodianship. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the process behind identifying those grasses. Were you working with Indigenous groups that told you which grasses? Like, how did that actually come about?
Thanks for the question. I'd love to give you more detail, and maybe this is a conversation article in the making. But I actually wasn't involved in the detail of it because the agency is in the people that live there. They got the people around to come and show them which grasses, and I don't know if they were a traditional custodian of the land, but they set up the science around it. They're collecting the data, they're sharing, counting the frogs and looking out for wildlife, and so they're actively involved. It wasn't anything I did. They organised it. I didn't even organise that either, or even seed the idea. It was all from them. They wanted to know how to best look after place, and they organised it themselves. I'd like to touch on something that you mentioned, one of the questions, which was how do we do this at a large scale? And you align around a narrative of the potential of place. You align with that understanding, that love of place. You align with the traditional concept of a deep relationship to place, to country. To country being the place where you gain your knowledge, you gain your relationship and so forth. And so once you have that, you make the decisions that are best for country, for that place, for the community that lives of that place, the human and the more than human. So it starts with that will, that connection, that deep relationship. And one of the things to reflect on in your practices, and I'm sure I'll get some nods from the people out there, it takes time, it takes presence, and it takes being in the place and actively participating in the place. And that's potentially one of the largest challenges in our large projects is the timelines and how we take a breath within those timelines to create the conversations, to create the long relationships that it takes to build that. And it starts with story.
Fantastic. I'm just going to ask, just move on to Ludo, and then there's lots of questions that have come in as well from audience members. So I'll start moving to them in a sec. But Ludo, could you just tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in the city of Wyndham, just in terms of your own sense of creating a sort of sense of place in the design work you're doing there?
Thanks, Michelle. Great question. I've been there a year and 5 months and spent a year and a bit in the lockdown in Geelong. It's been an interesting time, and we've got, the answers are never simple, and with cities, the answers are never binary. You know, it's always both. It's not either or, and it's complex, and a bit like what Dominique was just saying. You know, it takes a lot of time to solve this, and it's about making sure that you don't think about the next 3 years, but you make sure you think out 30 years, because it's about, there's a wonderful quote, change will come when old men and women plant trees they know they won't sit in the shade under. It's about thinking about the future, our children and our grandchildren. And whilst that might sound a bit romantic, either you do fall in love with the place you work in or you don't. And if you fall in love with a place, you care. And if you care about something, you take care. You are deliberate. You have staying power. You build relationships. And so it's all been, for me, this year has been about building relationships with our partners, both public, private, in government, because we've got here because of a lack of collaboration in some respects. So we've got to work together to move forward. What is the common plan? Are we all signed up to it? Well, no, there isn't a common plan. So we are building a common plan. We're calling it the Wyndham Plan. It's a 30-year plan for the future of our city, which we will be speaking to the community about. We're working with different agencies and governments and private sector, because everybody needs to get their sort of shoulders to the pump in many respects. And so a couple of things we are doing, we've got an urban forest strategy which we've prepared, which is really looking at the very low tree canopy, which we have in Wyndham. I mean, a lot of these outer growth areas, there aren't trees on streets, Misha. How do people walk if there's no shade? And when it's raining, where is that sense of human scale? So in some parts of our city, there are no pavements. I mean, this is real basic stuff here, but if you don't have a pavement, you're not going to walk. You're going to get in your car. So we're working on that. We have a solar city plan where every single council building now has solar on it. So again, leading the way. We produced an active transport strategy during lockdown last year. And as I said, we've just increased our funding by 400% in the active transport strategy program. So we're beginning a journey of change, regeneration. I have an incredible team of place activators and place managers who have been undertaking a whole parklet program supported by the state government, working together with them. We've introduced pop-up bike lanes during COVID. All these things are being done in a kind of, I suppose it's a bit like an orchestra. All these amazing virtuoso performances are being coordinated through a collaborative model, a collaborative plan. And, lot is happening in Wyndham.
That actually raises a really interesting question that somebody's put up on our list, which is, when you're thinking about this sort of regenerative design, what is the role of advocacy in terms of pushing for particular concepts? And also, what is the role of engaging young people? I think one of the things that we notice in these sorts of discussions about physical spaces is that they tend to be led by older people for a variety of reasons. Yet, if you're a younger person, you've got a huge investment. If you're going to have a sense of place, we're talking about, a sort of a 20-minute sort of way of thinking about place. So how do you get young people involved? And that's a question for anyone on the panel. Just jump in if you've got any thoughts on that.
I might jump in, Misha, just on that one, just because it's something that we were really conscious of in terms of the 20-minute neighbourhood work, involving and educating young people. I mentioned it briefly, but we partner with the Geography Teachers Association of Victoria, and we run a really great curriculum resource for Year 7 students on 20-minute neighbourhoods. And one of the things that they do as part of that is look at their own neighbourhood and think about it in terms of how it might change, or what they have access to, or what, have that 20-minute neighbourhood kind of design thinking. And it's been such a great and successful project. We have a award ceremony at the end of the year, and it's actually been really inspiring, because I think that we found that the students themselves are not only learning themselves, but they're educating their parents and other people through the project as well, which I think is really nice, because it gets people thinking differently when they're hearing it from their kids as well. So it's a really important part of that advocacy point that you made. And I think we have made a real effort in terms of trying to promote and educate. And I think someone said create a party and people will come. So if you create something that people are really interested in, other people will want to do it. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to encourage people to be part of it, not just local people, but also convincing people within government and within other parts of the system to say, this is a great little party we've got going on over here. Come and join us. And we've got a rock star urban designer, so maybe we'll invite Ludo to be in the party.
Does anybody else want to jump in on that question about engaging young people in advocacy? No? Okay.
Well, sorry.
Go down.
I think it's critical, and also those that aren't necessarily heard usually, the elderly, different religions, different groups, migrants, and particularly our Indigenous people. I think it's a huge challenge to build that relationship all together, to invite them back. Many people have been excluded. We have depowered people because we wanted to control them, and now we realise we need to all be on this journey together to thrive. And so re-inviting and finding that trust building. And I think the young people, it's wonderful to hear about the work that you're doing, James, and the Year 7s. My daughter's in Year 7, so I'm looking forward to her doing that topic. But yes, building trust, I think, is critical. And I don't know, I get the sense that the young people don't trust us to do this. And so there's a job there.
Well, they haven't seen, they don't often see the best examples of the things that we should be doing. And I guess they're frustrated, and it's their future that we're messing up in some respects. And I think, it's perhaps maybe James that said it earlier, Dominique, but in Holland, they teach children urbanism at school. They teach concepts of city design at a very early age, so that as they get older, they are sort of, I suppose, they have a positive influence and understanding about cities. With modern traditional training techniques, we train in silos. An urban planner isn't an architect, and the city is like a human body. It operates as an organism and needs to be treated as a holistic package, not in a one department here and one budget here, but holistic treatment of the patient, because they're either sick or they're healthy. And so there's a real need to bring in the children, have youth panels. We're considering doing that. We've just engaged thousands of Wyndham residents in the future of their city through the Wyndham 2040 community consultation, but really tapping into those students, those young people, because ultimately we're preparing their future. And as you said, maybe they don't trust us, so we need to build that trust back.
There's another question actually sort of from the maybe other side of the political spectrum, which is basically arguing that different levels of government, both Commonwealth, state, and even local government, there are ways of thinking that aren't very productive in this sort of regenerative design space. And somebody's asked, what would be the key thing you would want to say to policymakers, to politicians, to try to get them thinking more constructively about these sorts of questions? Does anybody on the panel have a particular one burning thing that they would?
I think that if you trust people to step up and they truly step up, you reduce your costs, you reduce your need to regulate, because people will want to rather than have to. And it means that you don't need to go police your regulations, because people won't break them, because they're there because they want to and they understand why they have to be the way they have to be. There is a reason why the oldest living culture is the oldest living culture. They worked on and sorry to speak for you, Landy, but they worked on a sense of communal responsibility for country. and clear ways of being able to feel part of that narrative. And so I think you save money. We'll have money to spend on other things that are towards a thriving future rather than on making people behave.
And get First Nations peoples to write policy that will change things. Get them to author it.
I might just add, Misha, just quickly, just this, I think the argument around the economic benefits of what we're doing is quite powerful to politicians, and the fact that, as Dominic says, it will save money. So it's about demonstrating that, you know, over time, having this policy approach will save money for government. I think that spending time demonstrating that this is actually what they might say fiscally conservative, or, you know, fiscally sensible, is really important as well in making the case.
Yeah, I'm actually also interested in another thing sort of with the way you think about designing spaces, which is inclusion, like who gets excluded from particular spaces. And obviously, you know, there are issues about designing for disability, for example, which are very well known. But there are also issues about the way you think about spaces. For example, if you are creating lots of commercial spaces, they might be spaces where certain types of people are seen as less desirable than others, or are moved along, or there's different ways of approaching who gets access to the space. Can anybody on the panel talk about these questions of sort of access and inclusion and how it impacts their sort of design thinking?
Well, I can talk about a small scale project. This was done at Pipeworks Museum on the Maribyrnong. And it was something that I think I can't remember where the lady, she just found me one day doing a presentation with our dance group, Jitty Jitty. And she approached me as an urban planner, and she said, look, we're designing a park, and we want to include, we want to make it inclusive for everyone, and we want to have it based on the 6 layers of country that I talk about. And they incorporated all the different elements of their new park with different elements of country and the layers of country. And I think they even put a little QR code in there to tell the story, so kids can have a good time playing, but the parents, they can understand the story and the narrative, and the kids have little bits and pieces that they can search for, particular plants. Like if you look up here, how many of this particular plant can you find that we use for basket weaving and things like that. So fully incorporating the narrative allows them to feel more culturally safe from whatever background they're from in a playful area. So family zone. So little things like that can be translated into larger scale projects as well.
That sounds terrific, but one question that always forms in my mind when I hear this is these sort of Indigenous stories are so important in giving us a sense of space. They're so valuable. But I sort of wonder, is there ever a point at which we sort of don't have a right to them, like in a way that there's something that sort of belonged to Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people are sort of sometimes sort of being somewhat opportunistic in sort of taking these stories over? Is that something we should be careful about?
I think like an example in terms of language, if you wanted to name a building a Woiwurrung or an Indigenous name, I'll give the Wurundjeri example. If you wanted to name a building something that was, I often get these requests and I have a little giggle to myself because they say, oh, make it easily pronounceable and make it have a lovely meaning. But our language sometimes has a really long, unpronounceable word that might mean butterfly or something like that. And they feel you have to get permission from the Wurundjeri Council to name a building, for example. But the thing is, many people are using these language words, but when we want to use it for our programs or something that we're doing, it's already taken. We can't reuse that language word because it's taken by large-scale projects or buildings or planning projects or things like that. So it is taking that away from us. So we have to be careful as well what permissions we do give, because it can be exploited. And it's something that is also we've got to be careful that it's not a tokenistic gesture as well. Naming meeting rooms and things like that, and just getting the word and getting the tick is, again, it's not the right way to do things. You have to create a relationship with the community, because stuff in terms of language is really hard to find online, and that's for a reason, because we have to empower our own community first before we share it with others. So then we can collectively as a community share it with the wider community. So that's a touchy subject in terms of, cultural appropriation, really, of little bits of cultural information and knowledge, where we have to be the custodians of that as well, and not give it away too easily without creating that strong cultural friendship basis as well.
It probably goes back to the point you're making about collaboration, not consultation.
Yeah, that's my key catchphrase, I think.
Jump in.
Sorry.
Sorry, Dominic, after you.
I just wanted to build on the question around how we consult and work with First Nations Indigenous people. From my perspective, and I'm like a child within my understanding of this, but this is how I translate it for myself. As a designer, architect, academic, and so forth, if I need a plumber or an electrician or someone, I go and I put out to tender and I get a plumber, electrician, or whatever I need to help me with that project. Consulting with an Indigenous person around a particular aspect isn't that model. You can't just go and consult with any Indigenous person and ask them their advice on something, because within an oral knowledge, you build up knowledge through your initiation to the next layers of knowledge, and your family might be in charge of the fresh waters or the salt water or the turtle or the emu or the grasslands or whatever. And so you can't ask a grassland person about saltwater land, and so our understanding of how to consult needs to evolve to understand that we need to consult with a layer, a Indigenous person that is able to actually feel safe to share that with us, because it's in their knowledge holding education, their PhDs in saltwater or grasslands or whatever. Also to understand that all of their stories and how it's connected to country and artefacts and lands and songs and so forth, that is their library, their university, and so forth. And so when we're walking country with someone from that country, they are reading the books, they are sharing their wisdom, their PhDs, their millennia of knowledge sharing of this place. And often, because of the way we've been trained, we think, oh, they're just an electrician or so forth. And that's the key changes. And that's why it takes time. And that's why people talk about cultural safety, because they may not be able to share that particular story. And so that would be my contribution. And I hope, Mandy, that resonates.
Well, I think I'll just quickly say this. I think there's also the idea that Aboriginal people that live in an urban environment aren't knowledge holders anymore. But people have to understand that genetic memory is something that is inside you before you're physically born. So I have all of this knowledge that I'm still learning myself that still resonates within me, even though country is built over. And I often say this when I'm looking at my hand right now. I can still see you guys on the screen, but I know my hand is there. So that's how I see the cityscape. That's how I see the buildings. But I know those layers of country are below it, on it, and above it. So I try not to focus on that physical of what I can see, because it's something that is inbuilt with me. I speak for my ancestors and my elders that can no longer speak. And like I reinforce that knowledge does not change when you live in an urban environment. My PhD's theme, on country, off country, how do you reconnect and how do you connect to your culture and your language and ceremony when you live off your traditional homelands? And that could be generationally. And what the overarching outcome is, country is a spiritual thing. It's carried within you. So that's an important thing to remember when planning and thinking about different Aboriginal cultures, because we're all unique throughout Australia. We're very multicultural within Aboriginal culture, that you can't ask someone from Sydney to help tell the story or the narrative or design something in Naarm, for example. Yeah.
Okay. Ludo, I think you wanted to jump in, and then after that, I think we're going to have to wrap up because we're starting to run out of time. But Ludo, did you have one more thing to say?
It was just, thank you. It was just in response to your original question, really, around the sort of authenticity of it. I mean, I guess we can only talk from our own experience, and I would just really encourage everybody to step forward into the space and not be embarrassed, not to be shy, be proud, get it wrong if you do. Be corrected and be willing to change. And you know, in New Zealand, I'm from England, and I went to New Zealand, but I just stepped into it, and I appointed the first ever Māori design leader for Auckland. We got things wrong, but we did a traditional Māori welcome every time we had meetings, a proper in Māori language. We also sung a waiata for our team. I played the guitar, and we. You know, I guess it's about really diving in, and I don't think traditional peoples, I don't want to speak for them, but I would hope that they would be open to people making mistakes and trying their best. If it's authentic and you're trying your best, then no one can criticize. And I think fear of failure shouldn't be a barrier to really embracing it, because obviously I think it's the sleeping giant of Australia, the point of difference in the world, and I think it's super exciting. But it needs to be led from the top and almost encouraged. So that was just my personal view, and I'll do my best over time. It takes time.
Fantastic. Now, look, just before we wrap up, there's a couple of other really great questions that I just want to put out really quickly, and just for very, maybe 10, 15-second, very short responses, because we're not going to have time to get through all of them. There's a terrific one here that says, "Hi, Landy. Have you written a book featuring your incredible art with a detailed explanation of each piece? If not, you seriously should."
Well, that is maybe something that I can do in the future, but you can join the Mandy Nicholson tour of Naarm if you like, because my artwork's all over the place. People often joke with me, you should do a tour about your artwork, but no, I haven't. And that's something that probably should be included in the future, because I think including the kids and children's narrative in that as well will really boost that story. So I hope that was 15 seconds.
Okay. And just one more. Somebody's asked about the role of design review panels in the process. I'm sure some of you will have maybe strong feelings or thoughts about them. Can anybody give a 15-second what they think on the role of design review panels? Are they beneficial? Do they work? Nobody? Is this?
I guess it's it would be me, perhaps. At Auckland, we have 5 urban design panels. My old team review all large-scale private developments in the city, but we also set up a panel of all of mana whenua design professionals, and maybe 130 consultants in the broader program, reviewing projects, ensuring they meet best practice. Here in Australia, we have the Victorian, in Melbourne, we have the Victorian Government Architects Office. Really important, because its peer review is a really powerful way for the private sector to lift their game. So absolutely, but I would also say that the large capital programs are as important. The schools, the hospitals that get built, the large roading projects, the public transport projects. I don't know if there is a design panel at that highest level to review, but I think it's absolutely critical, because you've got to check and balance these things. You can't just let it things happen by accident. So yes, my experience, fantastically powerful.
Okay, fantastic. Look, I think we will need to end it there because we're running out of time. I'd just like to say thank you very much to all our panelists. That was absolutely terrific. I started the day in a very grumpy mood, for a lot of reasons. I'm sure many people are experiencing the same thing. And I think this has been a terrific way to sort of turn things around and feel a lot more optimistic. So thank you very much. And I'll just hand back to our hosts, whoever's going to take over from here.
Yes, thank you again to everybody, and especially as well, Misha, for this last part with the panel. I think you've provided a very sensitive and attentive line of questioning, which is also in following of the types of speakers that we've had with James and Mandy and Dominic and then Ludo. So just thank you to everybody for the collaborative efforts and the common tone and style and information that was shared across very diverse topics, but with, I think, some really strong values that come through. It was exactly the kind of thought-provoking and energetic and also critical exchange that we were hoping for. So we've been very fortunate to be able to share this visionary yet grounded perspectives that were collected in the symposium format today. So yeah, once again, thank you very much for your insights, but also for your incredible flexibility and generosity as we moved from an in-person to an online event. We were changing things as we went, which is quite like the times that we're facing at the moment. It requires us to have the ability to be able to adapt and reconcile in new ways, acknowledge challenges and issues, as well as look forward to the opportunities. But I think just as importantly is to have these forums to be able to discuss things and share in a respectful new way. So you've left us with very powerful ideas and useful concrete actions that we can all take away into our projects and organisations. And we were reminded of the value and potential of regenerative practice in and across our many industries and our daily lives. So thank you to everyone who's been with us online in our audience today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your days, and thank you for the questions that you've asked as well across the period of the format. I'd also like to thank the speakers again, but also CHC and Melbourne Connect. And I'd just like to leave you with one of my personal favourite quotes from a very forward-looking, inspiring and wise Ngāti Hine Elder from back in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Ko tā whiti kei te haerenga mai, kia kore e haere tonu. He nui rawa o mahi, kia kore e mahi tonu. And so that means you have come too far not to go further. You've done too much not to do more. And that was said by Sir James Henare, our Ngāti Hine Elder back home. So thank you very much, everybody. And I'll hand over to Dean, but enjoy the rest of your day and appreciate everything that was shared and given in this forum. Thank you. Oh, Dean, you're on mute.
Yes, good, thanks. So I just wanted to wrap it up there. That's a rookie error. Just to be able to thank everyone again and some pointed thank yous. The team at Melbourne Connect Innovation Week, especially Heath Evans and Tim Bright and Sarah Adams, who are working tirelessly to make 30+ events happen over the precinct this week. To Peter, Ross and Matt from Onstage Events for the tech support to make this happen. Sorry for people that don't take it off mute, can't help that. Our team at ClarkeHopkinsClarke, our colleagues Kath Doolan and Millie Steele and programming, logistics and marketing, all the work they've put into PR. And of course to Chris Beasley for the artwork. And finally, big thanks for everyone to joining today and joining to stay the course and hopefully everyone enjoyed this. I think what will be really good if everyone can take a few moments just to respond to a poll that will come up after this around the quality and the content. And also just to highlight that there was quite a lot of questions asked. So please know that will get through to speakers as well, and we'll look to be able to get some responses back around some shared email as well, because I think there were some really powerful ideas and actions that hopefully, I know me personally, has really made me think of some things different ways, and hopefully everyone shares that same sentiment. If you're keen to find out more about the work of Mandy or Dominic, Ludo, Misha, or ClarkeHopkinsClarke even, you can follow us all on social media. And if you're keen to explore some of the other 30+ events happening across Melbourne Connect this week, then jump into Innovation Week website. There's some fascinating events happening this week that you can still be part of across design, science, health, AI, startup, sustainability, kids and care. So there's a lot going on, even though we're all sitting in our separate little studies or bedrooms somewhere around Melbourne. But beyond that, I just wanted to say thanks from all of us and bye for now. So thanks, everyone.